ocean.
So you think that money is the root of all evil? Said Francisco d'Ancona.
Watching, we know you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah viewers. Today we're very fortunate to welcome Sheikh Alamgir Ali into the studio to discuss a very important article of his and to unpick some of the ideas behind the article, which was on the mercy of Allah, the rahmah of Allah, and how that ties in with how we understand our faith. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah Alamgir. The article I alluded to on the mercy of Allah is a fascinating one. It's places actually quite a dense article, but a very rich one. So perhaps we can try to unpick some of some of those ideas that you discuss. Do you want to say something about what really motivated you to write the article in the first place?
Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The topic of mercy in our religion is something which is discussed a lot today, especially in the media. Islam is portrayed to be a religion of peace and mercy and what have you. Yet if you look around to what's happening around the world today, whether it be in wars or implementation of certain rules and regulations, that point that Islam advocates mercy is questioned. And sometimes people find it difficult to understand.
Right, so it's Muslims that seek to portray
Yeah.
their faith, their understanding of their faith as being a faith of mercy.
That's right.
But yeah, there are some people that question that. Absolutely, among non-Muslims, and even some Muslims, or at least Muslims, will say, yeah, okay, the practice of their fellow Muslims doesn't live up to that guideline of mercy.
That's right. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
So this was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the article. I wanted to make it clear to people that, yes, without a shadow of a doubt, mercy is a fundamental aspect of our religion. Every chapter in the Quran starts with the phrase Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah who's Rahman and Rahim, which clarifies really to all readers that the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extends to all things, and it's more dominant than his anger, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi, that my mercy overpowers my anger. So, but whilst that is the case, I wanted to be able to sort of reconcile that with the problems that people have in trying to understand the place of mercy within our religion.
Right. If I may touch on the particular scriptural text you alluded to there, the statement of the Prophet relaying Allah's words, that his mercy supersedes his anger.
That's right.
A lot of people, particularly in the West, maybe certainly non-Muslims who would view this, would say, how can a Muslim credibly justify the portrayal of his faith as a faith of mercy, quoting those words with the behavior of Muslims? The Muslims seem to be angry wherever they are. There doesn't seem to be any mercy in the actions of Muslims. They're involved in killing and massacring. They're really actually it's words, and there is no mercy in the Muslim faith.
I think it's important that we don't conflate the actions of particular groups of Muslims with the actual faith itself. Yes, they might do certain actions might be committed in the name within the name of Islam, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what actually represents our religion. But secondly, I think it's important that we understand, what is mercy. That's something that I spoke about in the article, and one of the points that I mentioned is that mercy, it's something which generally you'll find people, they appreciate, they understand, but sometimes our understanding of mercy, or the understanding of mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, might not be appreciated by everyone. Just like, for example, the way a parent might discipline a child. The parent does that not because they're out of torture for the child, but because out of mercy for the child. The parent wants to see the best out of the child. Whereas the child will see that discipline as torture and abuse. So likewise, in many regards, our understanding is very limited of the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works and the laws that He might give. For example, we might not see the full benefits behind some of the teachings that He has and pass on to mankind.
Is that really a appropriate justification for some of the very harsh legislation that I don't think can be just dismissed as the views or practice of some Muslims?
Yeah.
Most Sunni Muslims, mainstream Muslims, accept this concept of hudud, of the Islamic punishments for the capital crimes. That doesn't fit in accord with a merciful faith in the modern world. How?
I think one of the reasons why people have this understanding and is because they misrepresent the position of hudud within our religion. Many people think that hudud is sharia and sharia is hudud.
Right. Sorry, just explain a little bit. I probably mentioned the word, but hudud. What exactly do you mean by? What is the correct Sharia understanding, Islamic legal understanding of this word hudud, often used?
So hudud is essentially the penal code within our religion, which is implemented by the state authority upon people who've committed certain crimes that have been clearly stated within the Quran and the Sunnah. Yes, there are.
Isn't this basically what the Sharia is? Isn't the Sharia really?
This is an aspect of the Sharia. This is the point. This is the point I'm trying to make. Hudud is a small aspect within the Sharia. The Sharia encompasses many different aspects, whether it be related to acts of worship or how to interact with others in terms of transactions, marriage, divorce, etc.
Right. So it's not the entirety of the Sharia. The Sharia is far broader than that.
Yes.
Okay, that would be enlightening to some views, but the idea then still, nevertheless, that it is a part of the Islamic faith is still something that many people find hard to accept.
Yeah. So
how is that? How does that reconcile with the idea of mercy?
Okay, so since we've established now that hudud is an aspect of the Sharia, not the Sharia in entirety, then we must understand the hudud in light of the other rulings. And so if one was to observe the other rulings within the Sharia, and we can speak at length about that, whether it be related to acts of worship or the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates laws with regards to maintenance of families, for example, etc., and the obligation of providing. We can clearly see aspects of mercy within those aspects. But going back to the hudud, etc., we might find that it is intrinsically maybe difficult for people to accept certain hudud. They might seem very harsh, and to many people they might seem very outdated. Okay, so taking these particular hudud into consideration, what I tried to say in the article is that sometimes, yes, you will find these harsh rulings, but perhaps we do not understand the extent and the benefit of these rulings. I mean, take for example, if there is a harsh punishment, okay, it will be harsh upon that person, but at the same time it will act as a huge deterrent within society, so that people will not think, it will prevent people from thinking, oh, maybe if I was to commit the same crime, maybe I can get away with it. They'll be too scared. So by implementing maybe such a strict rule, it would be a mercy for the rest of society, because people wouldn't think twice to commit the same crime.
Is there a deeper philosophy then of mercy and its understanding in Islam and God's mercy that you're trying to tease out, that you're trying to?
Absolutely, and this is the point here. This is why I said how in many cases the human mind cannot fathom and understand and appreciate the extent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. Just like I said, for example, in a hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man yuridillahu bi khairin yusibu minhu." That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for a person, He sends afflictions upon him. He gives him a musibah.
Counterintuitive, doesn't it?
And this is the point here. So a person, when he receives that tribulation and that affliction, he might think he's being punished, but in reality, God is washing away his sins. And so in reality, for that person, it's actually an act of mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why later on in the article, I wanted to distinguish between two very important concepts. One is that is of rahmah, and the other is that of ra'fa, or compassion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's ar-ra'uf, He is the compassionate, and He is ar-rahim, He is the most merciful. They might sound as though they're synonyms, but in reality there are some very important distinctions between the two. Ra'fa, Allah's compassion, is something which everyone experiences and enjoys. Yani it's comforting to everyone. Everyone would see it like that. Like, for example, Allah giving provisions, Allah giving a person a loving family, for example. Whereas Rahmah, on the other hand, there might be aspects of Rahmah which might be painful to a person, like illness, for example. Illness is something which, nobody likes.
So different manifestations of God's mercy.
That's right. And sometimes that mercy cannot be, understood by the person and appreciated by the person.
So more on this notion of Ra'fa, how it distinguishes between how it's distinguished with Rahmah.
Yeah.
In Ra'fa, there is, in God's manifestation of Ra'fa, in Allah's manifestation of Ra'fa,
Yeah.
there isn't unpleasantness, there isn't something bitter.
No, then we would say that would be Allah's mercy, for example. Like, for example, giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreeing that a person becomes sick, or Allah afflicting someone with a trial or tribulation.
This is something which is merciful, but tinged with, or possibly tinged with, an element of bitterness or unpleasantness.
That's right. Yes.
How? Okay.
Yeah.
How does that I guess people would sort of understand that in terms of the occurrences that happen in their life. What in Islamic faith we might term God's decree, as it occurs. What about God's laws?
Yeah.
You mentioned something about that.
Yeah.
But if we bring the conversation back to that, there are. It's not just the hudud punishments that are seen as being not equating to or not fitting in with a concept of a merciful God. What about the very harsh and strict laws? There are very strict laws about dress.
Yeah.
Strict laws about dietary rules. Rules about social interaction.
Yeah.
There seems to be a never-ending list of very restrictive rules.
Yeah.
Isn't really actually a more accurate conception of Islamic faith as being a faith of very strict and harsh rules, and not a religion of mercy and compassion.
I think that's a very subjective statement. As Muslims, we believe that our religion is a religion of ease. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna ad-deena yusrun," the religion is ease. Another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Bu'ithtu bil-hanafiyya samha." I've been sent with an easygoing form of monotheism, strict monotheism, but it's samha. The religion and Sharia, its rulings are quite easygoing. The scholars explain that in two ways. They said that if you look to the nature of the rules within the religion, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated laws that in and of themselves are easy for the people to adhere to. So, for example, praying 5 times a day, for a woman to cover, for example, and for a man to cover as well, his awrah, to cover as well. These fall within the realm of human capability, and it's something that it doesn't overburden a person, and that's why Allah says, "La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha." Allah doesn't burden a soul more than it can bear. And when difficulty does arise, then again the Sharia gives us concessions. It makes it easy for the people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us better than anybody else, and Allah knows us better than we know ourselves. So when we do go through difficulties and which are beyond our own capabilities, then Allah gives us concessions.
Right. So there is a mercy in the decree of God, of Allah, in terms of what happens to a person in his life, hardships that may afflict them, bitterness, because there is a wider a picture there.
Yeah.
And also in terms of God's laws, Allah's laws.
Yes.
Those laws, although they may seem, or there may be an aspect of difficulty in them, overall, it's in the person's benefit in terms of their growth and how they're to move forward in their lives.
Yes.
That's a very enlightening set of points and guidance on that issue, Sheikh Alamgir. Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Alamgir, in the previous section, you explained very eloquently and I think very clearly the distinction between how we understand God's mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and our own, and mercy of humans, and we shouldn't mix the two up. And you also spoke about how that plays out in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws and in the decrees that we that we experience in terms of what He actually wills to be in our lives. What about when we're looking at how we decide, how we interpret the Sharia, right? As scholars and as a community, we try to decide how we should approach something.
Yeah.
How far should mercy be a deciding factor?
Yeah.
Some say that mercy is the lens through which we look at things.
Yeah.
And that's the only lens.
I think this is a common problem that I've seen within our community. I think it's important to establish that, yes, within our religion we have important generic principles that help govern and shape our attitude towards rulings and situations. You can call them maqasid even, the higher objectives of Sharia. And at the same time we have individual scriptures and texts, for example, that might point to a certain ruling or etc. It's important to establish that we as Muslims, that we believe that our religious scriptures, they do not contradict our generic principles within our religion. So if a circumstance arises such that we think that there is a particular text, for example, that contradicts a higher objective within our religion, we shouldn't be quick to dismiss the text and say, well, this is just an individual text and an overall principle is far more important than an individual text. I think that really shows a lack of understanding maybe of the text itself or of the general principle, and the person's inability to combine both together and make both of them sort of harmonize both the generic principle and the individual text itself. So, take for example, whether it be, for example, the laws of inheritance, how a woman sometimes gets less than the share of a man. So we might deem that to be, if we say that Islam promotes, fairness, for example, and justice, which is definitely something that Islam promotes, then we might look at this individual law and say, well, that doesn't fit this higher objective, therefore we must dismiss this individual text or this particular ruling or judgment in favor of the generic principle. That's fundamentally flawed. This is what I would argue is fundamentally flawed, and it shows how the person is incapable really of approaching the text in a correct manner. What we should realize is that the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ahadith and the ayat from the Quran, they are all, if they are agreed upon in specific reference to the ahadith of the Prophet sallam, and they're rigorously authentic, we must understand them to be, the best guidance for us. And if we think that such texts contradict generic principles within our religion, then we must sort of accuse ourselves of maybe lacking an understanding of that particular text.
At the same time, is there in your view, and on the basis of your reading and the scholarly literature you've studied, is there any scope then for a understanding of a mercy-based decision process?
Yes.
Does that have, although you've said it must be tempered with the other specific scriptural texts, is there any place for it? Or should it just actually be dismissed from our lexicon? Should it be something that we don't look at all? There's just the text, and that's all we need to look at. There is there isn't this sort of wishy-washy concept of mercy. Actually, what you're doing is you're muddying the situation. You're actually drawing a Western concept of ease and comfort, which really has no place in our faith.
No, I think that would be taking it too far. I mean, if we clearly look to, for example, the way the Prophet ﷺ interacted with people and the way he taught the companions, he clearly taught, there was clearly a message of mercy. You know, he would say to the companions, "Yassiru wa la tu'assiru," make things easy for the people, don't make things difficult for the people. And when it came, for example, the woman who came to the Prophet ﷺ and she had committed zina, you know, now we could have said, like, you know, let's rule by the letter of the law and just say apply the penalty.
Isn't that first, actually, before I interrupt you, I'll let you play out the rest of that incident. What happened?
Yeah. So the woman, she came and she admitted and that, you know, she committed adultery and that she was pregnant. The Prophet ﷺ turned his face away. SubhanAllah. He turned his face away as if he didn't want to hear her acknowledging that sin that she committed. And when she informed him that she was pregnant, you know, he told her to go back. You know, as if he was hoping that maybe she would repent and she wouldn't come back. And he didn't go out looking for her. Okay?
Right.
And he even instructed the family members of this woman, "Ahsin ilayha," be good to her. Why? Because he knew that this news would spread about this woman, that she committed zina, and so people would be, "Oh, how can you've committed this terrible crime," and therefore treat her really harshly. We can clearly see the language of mercy there.
Right.
You know. And
what was the culmination of that story? How did it end?
Well, obviously the had was implemented upon her, and this was her wish. You know, this was her wish. The Prophet didn't go out of his way, and in many cases he would want to repel the implementation, not completely negate, but if there were any ambiguities there present.
That again, could people not argue that that's really only the function of the Prophet? That only happened in the time of the Prophet. Now we are restricted to just a direct implementation of the letter of the law. We can't sort of water down the faith but with these Western liberal conceptions of mercy. This is alien. This is a new deen you're trying to bring.
Well, I mean, Western concept of mercy, I mean, that's quite a loaded term. I mean, clearly there is a language of mercy within our tradition.
Is this not just at the time of the Prophet?
But then, I mean, take for example, the Prophet commanded the people. He says, you know, idra'ul hudud bishubuhat, you know, sort of, you know, repel these hudud, these laws. If there exists any shubuhat, any sort of doubts for you to want to implement it. And so that's very different to say, you know, what some groups might want to do is like they're bloodthirsty.
Shouldn't we be stoning the adulteresses at the first sort of evidence that that's the case? Shouldn't we be chopping the hands of anybody that we think has maybe stolen something? Is that not what the Sharia is?
Well, what we find within the Sharia is that yes, these rules exist, but our attitude towards it, that's what's important. You know, as Muslims, we don't see the glorification of God in the mere implementation of the rule itself. You know, rather, you know, we see the veneration of God in the existence of such laws, but for them to be approached and implemented in the correct manner. It's not just the mere existence of the law.
Right.
You know, I've mentioned this point in a number of cases before, but Islam came in order to draw people closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, you know, we can't enforce taqwa upon people like that. And so it's important that we realize these laws are there in order to facilitate, you know, God consciousness and taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not just to merely implement for the sake of mere implementation.
Well, you mentioned that, but I mean, a group which I think many people now is in the forefront of many people's minds, Muslims and non-Muslims, who claim that they are implementing the faith of the Prophet in its complete form, you know, Daesh, Islamic State, call them what you want.
Yeah.
They are implementing. They don't have any consideration for these kinds of ideas you're talking about. Also, they believe in an aggressive, expansive war against all nations, to bring them as they claim under God's rule, under Allah's rule.
Yeah.
Isn't that actually the right understanding of Islam? Jihad with no compromise, and God's laws implemented without being watered down.
Well, as I mentioned before, you know, we believe that our veneration to God is not just expressed through the mere implementation. It's about bringing the people getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what we clearly see in the example of groups like ISIS is that they've completely stripped the concept of mercy away from the Sharia itself. So in the case of, for example, you know, idra'ul hudud bi shubahat, or repel, you know, the hudud by doubts, for example. We don't see that existent within
So you're saying actually the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us to try to stave off these hudud punishments, the harsh punishments with the embedded into the penal code, are not something that a judge should rush to try to implement.
Absolutely.
Which may actually, I think, subvert the view of many non-Muslims. There is sadly that impression of Islam. One that, you know, if ISIS set themselves up as spokesmen for what true faith is, there is also the conception of many non-Muslims that they are the true representatives of what Islam really is. That is. But yet you are saying that, as an example, in the penal code, we shouldn't. Islam isn't actually. It's there, but it's not something that we should be rushing out to do. That's an interesting message, I think, for many people. How then would you? How would you suggest that we should? Is there any way in which you think the correct message of Islam as a religion of mercy, balanced with the other considerations, how should that message be propagated?
I think the concept of mercy itself needs to be discussed and analysed more within the public sphere. Clearly, there is a very limited understanding of what mercy is, and I think for most people understand mercy in light of the concept of ra'fa, of compassion.
Right.
So when people hear the word mercy, you know, the violence or hardship or tribulations would sound as though they are the complete antithesis to mercy itself. But what I would argue is that, you know, within mercy there can be maybe adversity, there can be sometimes hardship, there can be sometimes tribulation, and there can sometimes even be suffering. It's upon us to acknowledge and realize our own sort of, you know, limitations and our weaknesses in our understanding of what is, you know, overall better for mankind.
Right, but the overall endpoint is always positive and beneficial.
Absolutely, yeah, yes.
A very important message that I think all Muslims need to hear, and one that they need to try to get out and explain to other people, to the rest of the community, and to non-Muslims. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Alamgir, for coming in and explaining so wonderfully this aspect of Islam. Jazakallah khair to the viewers for following us today. I hope you found the discussion one that was beneficial. I found it to be extremely interesting. So many different issues were touched on. The issue of the penal code in Islam, the idea about how God's mercy doesn't negate what happens in a person's life. At the same time, it doesn't negate the various laws that we have to follow. All of those tie in seamlessly with Allah's mercy. It is a central aspect of our faith. It is one that we need to explain in the correct way, tying in with Allah's wisdom. I hope that you took that away with you. Please go back and read Sheikh Alamgir's article on the website, which explains a lot more depth some of these issues. There are many other articles on the website also which you can benefit from. Some of those articles will form the basis of future episodes and future discussions. I hope you will come back and join us for those. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Do you think that money is the root of all evil? Said Francisco d'Ancona.